Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series, Men Around the Führer, where we tell every night a tale about one person in the close circle of Hitler. And tonight's tale is about Hermann Wilhelm Göring. It begins not in the mud of the trenches, but in the halls of privilege and the shadow of aristocracy, born in Rosenheim, Bavaria, on January the 12th, 1893. His father, Heinrich Ernst Göring, a former cavalry officer, had served as the first Governor-General of German Southwest Africa. Yet much of young Hermann's early life unfolded at Castle Weldenstein near Nuremberg. This lavish setting was provided by his godfather Hermann Eppenstein, a wealthy Jewish physician and businessman. It was here, sustained by Eppenstein's patronage, that Göring developed his precocious interest in a military career, playing with toy soldiers and dreaming of glory. He was molded by the German military machine from an early age, sent to boarding school, and later at 16 to the military academy in Berlin-Lichterfelde, graduating with distinction. In June 1912, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Prussian army. When the Great War erupted in August 1914, Göring was stationed near the French frontier. His service in the infantry was short-lived, however, as the damp conditions of trench warfare led to rheumatoid arthritis, confining him to a military hospital in Freiburg. This medical interlude was perhaps the most crucial pivot of his young life, as his friend, Bruno Loerzer, who had already trained as a pilot, instilled in him a fervent desire to take to the skies. Though his formal application was initially rejected, Göring circumvented the rules, enlisting informally as an air observer for Loerzer. This audacity paid off. He flew reconnaissance and bombing runs, including missions targeting the fortifications of Verdun, earning the Iron Cross First Class in March 1915. By late 1915, he earned his pilot's badge. His career, marked by injuries, a severe hip wound in November 1916, and recoveries, suffering from tonsillitis in 1917, soared rapidly. He eventually commanded Jagdstaffel 27. The ultimate symbol of his prowess came in the summer of 1918, when he was awarded Imperial Germany's highest military honor, the coveted Pour le Mérite, for gallantry and aerial victories. By mid-June, he had achieved 22 air combat victories. More significant than the medals was his appointment on June 6, 1918, as the final commander of the legendary Jagdgeschwader 1, the famous fighter wing named after the legendary Red Baron Manfred von Richthofen. This appointment placed him among the most notable flying aces of the war. Yet even at his peak, his arrogance made him unpopular with the men he commanded. When the armistice was signed, ending the war, Göring was released from the army in the rank of captain. The war's end brought not triumph, but deep personal disillusionment. Like countless other veterans, Göring was fiercely dedicated to the stab-in-the-back myth, believing the German army had been betrayed by the civilian leadership, including Marxists, Jews, and Republicans. The highly decorated ace, now penniless, found himself shunned by his fiancée's upper-class family, who promptly broke off the engagement. He turned his piloting skills toward earning a living, working briefly for Fokker, barnstorming, and later moving to Sweden, where he worked for the airline Svensk Lufttrafik. It was in Sweden, during the winter of 1920 to 1921, that fate introduced him to Baroness Karin von Kantzow. Estranged from her husband and mother to an 8-year-old son, Karin immediately captivated Göring. After she obtained a divorce, the couple married in Munich in February 1922. In the autumn of 1922, back in Munich studying political science, Hermann Göring heard a fiery orator named Adolf Hitler. Göring later described falling under Hitler's spell and promptly joined the NSDAP. Recognizing the value of a highly decorated war hero, Hitler appointed Göring the leader of the Sturmabteilung SA, or Brown Shirts, in early 1923, to benefit from his fame and aid in recruitment. Hitler later praised Göring, saying he was the only one of its heads that ran the SA properly, turning a disheveled rabble into a disciplined force of 11,000 men in a very short time. Göring was instrumental in these early political days, playing hostess to influential figures like Hitler, Rudolf Hess, and Ernst Röhm. She and Hermann possessed exceptional social skills and a talent for building relationships that benefited the rising Nazi movement immensely. The march to power was fraught with risk, culminating in the failed beer hall putsch in November 1923. Göring, marching alongside Hitler, was shot in the groin. Smuggled into Innsbruck for emergency surgery, he was administered morphine to manage the agonizing pain. This necessary medical treatment proved to be his undoing. It was the inception of a severe morphine addiction that would shadow him until the final year of his life. Now a wanted man, Göring fled with Göring, dependent on Nazi sympathizers for funds. Their journey took them through Austria to Venice and by 1924 to Rome. In Rome, Göring met the Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini. Göring had established the SA, cultivated elite relationships for the NSDAP, and introduced Hitler to Mussolini, cementing his profound early contributions to the Nazi movement. However, the addiction soon overwhelmed him. By 1925, his drug use had caused such severe physical deterioration and violence that Göring's family intervened. In September 1925, he was certified a dangerous drug addict and placed in Långbro Asylum in Sweden. He was so violent he required a straitjacket. Though his psychiatrist determined the condition was solely drug-induced, Göring's mind was compromised. He was gradually weaned off the drug. In 1927, following a general amnesty, Göring returned to Germany. He was elected to the Reichstag in 1928, utilizing his status as a famous flying ace to serve as a public relations officer for Nazism. His electoral success gave him access to powerful figures like Fritz Thyssen and Hjalmar Schacht. The death of his beloved wife Karin in 1931 from heart failure, exacerbated by epilepsy and tuberculosis, was a profound shock from which he never truly recovered. When the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag after the July 1932 election, Göring was duly elected president of the Reichstag in August 1932, a position he retained until the regime's final days. On January 30, 1933, the Nazi ascent culminated with Hitler's appointment as chancellor. Göring was instantaneously catapulted into the highest echelon of power. He was appointed Reichsminister without portfolio, Reich Commissioner of Aviation, Minister-President of Prussia, Prussian Interior Minister, and Chief of the Prussian Police. In April 1933, Hitler also delegated his authority as Reichsstatthalter, Reich Governor of Prussia, to Göring. Göring's immense authority in Prussia allowed him to swiftly establish the instruments of Nazi control. On April 26, 1933, he created the Geheime Staatspolizei, secret state police, universally known as the Gestapo. Though he quickly ceded control of this brutal institution to Heinrich Himmler in 1934, Göring was its initial architect. The pivotal moment for consolidating internal power came quickly, the Reichstag fire on the night of February 27, 1933. Göring was among the first high-ranking officials to arrive. Though a communist radical, Marinus van der Lubbe was arrested and claimed sole responsibility. Göring immediately seized the opportunity to call for a massive crackdown on all communists, a systematic campaign against political opponents. The resultant Reichstag fire decree suspended basic rights and permitted detention without trial. Göring demanded the execution of thousands of arrested party members. Later, at Nuremberg, the prosecutor claimed that General Franz Halder testified Göring had boasted he himself started the fire, though Göring denied the accusation. In mid-1934, paranoia over Ernst Röhm's burgeoning SA, which numbered over 2 million men, led to the bloody purge known as the Night of the Long Knives. Göring, collaborating with Himmler and Heydrich, was deeply involved. He personally reviewed the lists of thousands of SA prisoners, determining who among them was to be summarily executed. In 1935, Germany formally acknowledged the existence of the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, in blatant violation of the Treaty of Versailles, with Göring proudly serving as its commander-in-chief and Reich aviation minister. 2 years later, in October 1936, Hitler elevated Göring's civilian role further by naming him plenipotentiary of the Four-Year Plan. This economic program, initially conceived by Hitler in August 1936, aimed at revitalizing the German army and economy within 4 years in anticipation of war, creating a self-sufficient Germany not dependent on outside raw materials. Despite his admitted ignorance of economics, Göring was granted exceptional powers in this domain. He bypassed the economics ministry and founded vast state-owned enterprises like the Göring Reich Works, focusing on developing a synthetic materials industry, steel production, aluminum factories, and oil refineries to eliminate the need for foreign resources. This vast economic power fueled his political expansionism. Göring pushed hard for the incorporation of Austria, Anschluss, in 1938, coveting the rich Styrian iron ore deposits and the highly skilled Austrian labor force. He personally telephoned Austrian leaders, threatening military invasion if peaceful unification was not immediately forthcoming. Later, he used bombing threats against Czechoslovakian President Emil Hácha to force acquiescence to the German occupation of Bohemia and Moravia. Göring's ascent ran parallel to a legendary lifestyle of breathtaking opulence. He had married the actress Emmy Sonnemann in 1935, a spectacle celebrated with a massive reception and a flyover of fighter aircraft with Hitler himself acting as best man. Göring was notorious for his extravagant tastes, characterized by his corpulence and his preference for garish, flamboyant uniforms. He held numerous positions: Reichsmarschall, Reich Master of the Hunt, Master of the German Forests, each necessitating a special, tailored uniform, including one with a jewel-encrusted baton. His primary indulgence, however, was his vast property and art collection. He built the elaborate hunting lodge, Karin Hall, in Schorfheide Forest, in memory of his first wife, moving her body there in 1934. At Karin Hall, he housed not only his collections, but also kept pet lion cubs, borrowed from the Berlin Zoo. Hermann Göring positioned himself as a major art collector, at one point boasting of having the largest private art collection in all of Europe. In reality, he was a chief proponent of organized art looting, Nazi plunder. He worked closely with the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, ERR, the organization tasked with systematically pillaging cultural property from conquered territories, specifically targeting Jewish collections, museums, and libraries throughout Europe. Göring's private trains continually transported his selections back to his estates. He particularly favored European romanticism and the nude female form. His chief art looter, Dr. Bruno Lohse, a strapping SS officer with a doctorate in art history, facilitated the theft. Göring regularly visited the looted art collection center at the Jeu de Paume in Paris, where he personally selected masterpieces, often those confiscated from the French Jewish community. His haul included pieces by Botticelli, Monet, Van Gogh, and Raphael, such as the missing portrait of a young man looted from the Czartoryski Museum. At the height of his acquisitions, he was obtaining at least 3 paintings a week. The estimated value of his approximately 1/500 pieces was $200 million, equivalent to a colossal $2.9 billion today. When questioned about this looting at Nuremberg, Göring attempted to portray himself as a cultural agent for the German state, minimizing his personal gain, though he did admit his passion for collecting and wanting a small part of the confiscated items. However, the scope of his guilt was far greater than mere greed. he was involved in the financial persecution of Jews. Following Kristallnacht in November 1938, Göring presided over a meeting where he demanded that the Jewish community pay a fine of 1 billion marks for the losses incurred during the pogrom and plotted the confiscation, Aryanization of Jewish property. In 1939, he established the Central Office for Jewish Emigration, which used any means necessary to force Jews to flee the Reich. Most damningly, in July 1941, Göring issued the crucial memo to Reinhard Heydrich, ordering him to organize the practical details for the final solution to the Jewish question, thus placing him at the direct helm of the bureaucratic mechanism for genocide. He was a director of the oppressive program against the Jews and other races. When the Second World War began in September 1939, Göring was at his zenith. Hitler immediately appointed him chairman of the Council of Ministers for the Defense of the Reich, the War Cabinet. Crucially, Hitler designated Göring as his successor as Führer. The Luftwaffe was initially triumphant. It quickly defeated the Polish Air Force, and its paratroopers seized vital airfields during the invasion of Norway and captured Fort Eben-Emael in Belgium. Following the fall of France in 1940, Hitler bestowed upon Göring the unprecedented rank of Reichsmarschall des Großdeutschen Reiches, making him the highest-ranking officer in the entire German military. He received the Grand Cross of the Iron Cross, the only person to receive this decoration during World War II, but his confidence quickly outpaced his capabilities. Before the Battle of Britain, Göring famously boasted that if even a single enemy aircraft flies over German soil, my name is Meyer. When the Luftwaffe failed to defeat the RAF and Allied bombers began striking Germany in 1940, the German people darkly mocked him by calling air raid alarms the Meyer signal. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed indefinitely due to the air defeat. The turning point that truly shattered his standing came on the Eastern Front, particularly the Battle of Stalingrad. After the Sixth Army was encircled in November 1942, Göring made a colossal, fatal miscalculation. He guaranteed Hitler that the Luftwaffe could establish an airlift and deliver a minimum of 300 tons of supplies to the trapped men daily. Trusting this promise, Hitler forbade retreat. The supplies delivered never surpassed 120 tons per day, leading to the catastrophic surrender of 91,000 men in February 1943. As the Allies intensified strategic bombing against oil refineries and industrial centers, Göring's reputation cratered. His failure to protect the German homeland alienated the public and critically estranged him from Hitler. By D-Day, June 1944, the once invincible Luftwaffe could muster only about 300 fighters against the Allies' 11,000 aircraft. By Hitler's final birthday on April 20, 1945, with the Soviets closing in on Berlin, Göring had already evacuated his vast art collection from Karin-Hall and traveled to his estate at Obersalzberg. On April 22nd, the day Hitler conceded the war was lost and announced his intent to commit suicide, Göring received a crucial notification. Reviewing the 1941 decree that named him successor, Göring, fearing that his rival Martin Bormann would seize power, concluded that Hitler had lost his freedom of action, necessitating that Göring take leadership. He sent a cautiously worded telegram to the Führer. If Hitler did not reply by 10:00 p.m. that night, April 23rd, Göring would assume leadership of the Reich as Hitler's deputy. Bormann, intercepting the message, successfully convinced the enraged Hitler that this was a naked act of treason and an attempted coup. Hitler promptly rescinded the 1941 decree, expelled Göring from the Nazi Party, and ordered his arrest. Bormann announced publicly that Göring had resigned for health reasons. Freed by a Luftwaffe unit on May 5th, Göring attempted to surrender to the American lines near Rastatt on May 9th, hoping he would be treated with respect as a spokesman for Germany. He was immediately taken into custody by the U.S. Army. Göring was first housed at Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, a temporary prisoner of war facility. At the behest of the American command, he was stripped of the large quantity of morphine, dihydrocodone, he carried. Under a strict regime, his dose, the equivalent of 260 to 320 ml of morphine daily, was gradually reduced, forcing him through rehabilitation until he was fit for trial. He lost 60 pounds. While in custody, his intelligence was measured. Hermann Göring scored an IQ of 108, placing him solidly in the genius bracket above the 130 threshold. In September 1945, he was transferred to Nuremberg to face the International Military Tribunal. As the highest-ranking Nazi official present, second only to Karl Dönitz in political rank, he was the star defendant. The indictment was sweeping, listing 4 primary charges: conspiracy, waging a war of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, specifically detailing his role as director of the slave labor program and the creator of the oppressive program against Jews. Göring pleaded not guilty. During the 218-day proceedings, Göring was famously defiant, using gestures, shaking his head, and laughing at what he viewed as the farce. He constantly sought to influence the testimony of other defendants until he was placed in solitary confinement. Testifying on his own behalf, he played the part of the loyal soldier and diplomat, denying any knowledge of the concentration camps, which he insisted were Himmler's domain. The prosecution, however, produced documentation showing his involvement in the economic plunder of the Jews and his direct order initiating the final solution. On September 30th, 1946, Göring was found guilty on all 4 counts. The tribunal's judgment was scathing. His guilt is unique in its enormity. The record discloses no excuses for this man. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Facing the ignominious fate of a common criminal, Göring desperately requested that his sentence be changed to execution by firing squad, a soldier's death which he believed would cement his legacy as a military man rather than a despised murderer. The request was flatly denied by the Allied Control Council. On the evening of October 15, 1946, just hours before he was scheduled to be hanged, Hermann Göring cheated the executioner. He committed suicide by ingesting a potassium cyanide capsule. The manner in which he obtained the poison remains a subject of historical debate. The prevailing theory holds that he had managed to conceal the capsule within a jar of cold cream or hair cream before his effects were confiscated. One account suggests his natural charm and charisma, renewed after his detoxification, allowed him to influence an American guard to retrieve the concealed item for him shortly before his execution. Another account, given decades later by former U.S. Army Private Herbert Lee Stivers, claimed he was tricked into smuggling medicine inside a fountain pen to Göring. Göring's body, along with those of the men who were executed, was cremated at Ostfriedhof in Munich. His ashes were scattered in the Isar River, preventing any monument from marking the burial place of the man who rose from decorated war hero to the second man of the Reich who died a convicted war criminal.